On this episode, Ordinary People Podcast, we talk about gentrification, the effects it have on the neighborhoods that's happening into, and also the people who live in those neighborhoods. We also discuss how you too can buy your own home, how to own your own home, and get over those hurdles and blockages that stop you from being a homeowner. We also talk about how gentrification expands outside of certain communities and affect people of all different races and gender, and how class shows that gentrification is continuing to grow. We discuss that and much more on this episode of the Ordinary People Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Ordinary People Podcast, where it's not about likes and views. It's about inspiring, motivating, and informing you. I am your host, Alan the Great. We got another great episode in store for y'all today. Today I want to talk about something that's affecting any and everybody who lives in an urban neighborhood, who lives in the inner city. No, I'm not talking about crime. We didn't cover that a lot. No, I'm not talking about police brutality. We didn't cover that, and I'm pretty sure y'all tired of hearing about that. So I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about gentrification. Gentrification and how neighborhoods are changing. How they're changing. But are they changing for the better or is it changing for the worse? Is it good for the people who grew up, lived in those neighborhoods? Is gentrification good for them? Or is it just pushing them out? This is a question I want to answer today. This episode was brought on by a guest. And as you know, we always ask you guys to please let us know what you want to hear us talk about. And I guess Mr. Marcus Brown asked to speak about gentrification. So he's a teacher and he sees what gentrification is doing to the neighborhoods that he serves. He sees the negatives of it, so he asked me to speak about it. He asked me to speak about it about a few weeks ago, but I had a difficult time bringing myself to do this episode, not because I didn't want to, but because I had to find my point on it. So here's my point on gentrification, because I don't want to hold you up too long. Simple as this. Gentrification has been an issue where it's really changing neighborhoods into a way that I personally don't even notice my neighborhood no more. I don't know my neighborhood I grew up in anymore. When I drive through there, it's not the same. It's just not the same. It don't have the same feeling. Like for me, I try to bring my kids through my old neighborhood because see, now that I live in a nicer neighborhood, I want to see where I grew up at. Where I had learn how to fight for the first time, learn how to play sports. I want them to see where I grew up at. See what the inner city had to offer. Because see, when a lot of people think about the inner city, all you think about is the violence, the crime, and all the bad things that happen, and all the bad people that live there. And you don't realize there's so much more to it. There's so much more beauty in it. And how do we know there's so much more beauty in the inner city? There's so much more value in the inner city? Well, it's because developers are actually taking their money and starting to invest in the inner city, starting to invest in the riverfront by building up these apartments that are too expensive for the people who live in the neighborhood to stay in. They're putting stores that didn't exist anymore. See, when I grew up, I don't like Domino's Pizza now. Personally, I wouldn't eat Domino's Pizza. You couldn't pay me to. But when I grew up, we wanted Domino's Pizza. We had to drive outside the inner city to get Domino's Pizza. Now there's Domino's Pizza in the inner city. We got nice shopping centers in the inner city. Supermarkets are taking over. Local corner stores are now turning into Family Dollars and Dollar Generals. We couldn't even think about that stuff before. You got subways in the inner city. In urban neighborhoods where there was constant shooting and violence, and you got subways there. And it just like puzzles me. Then you see all this violence just leaving the city. And I'm starting to look at it and like wonder. So what's happening different now that all the violence is just starting to like kind of like seep its way out in the city and start to move a little farther away from where they're trying to develop and build up this the new housing that costs so much more. And I realized because see, one, you make it so expensive that the poor folks who are struggling to pay their rent, struggling to live day to day, or living paycheck to paycheck, you're making it so unaffordable for them, they have to leave the city that they grew up in. They have to leave homes they grew up in, that they lived their whole lives. They have to leave. Then you push them into other neighborhoods where it's recreating that same violence, the same poverty that they dealt with in the inner city. So in turn, you just take them from this neighborhood and you move them somewhere else. So you're not really getting rid of the problem. You're just kind of moving the problem. And that's what happened. But is that what gentrification is all about? No. Gentrification is about building up something, making something new, taking something old, something dirty, something gritty, and making it new. And that's what's going on. You got developers and people with money who are going into these old neighborhoods that weren't appreciated, that nobody lived in them neighborhoods really could find the true value in, and they're starting to make value. They're starting to make a coin out of it. And the interesting thing is, I talk to people all the time, and I always said to them, why don't you buy homes in these neighborhoods? And one of the biggest problems people will always say is, well, I don't have the money to be able to purchase a house. Because you think, and you're told, and you're taught to think that you got to have thousands of dollars to buy a house, when that's the furthest thing from the truth. With first-time home buyers, you can buy a house with as low as $1,000 in your pocket, $2,000. The money you get back from taxes, because most of the people do, when you're claiming kids or somebody else's kids, and you get money back from taxes, that same money that you use to buy a car every single year, that's going to break down before 6 months, you can use that money to buy a house. Position yourself so you can buy a house in your neighborhood. You can own a house. You're not living on Section 8. You're not living in projects. You own a piece of the neighborhood that you grew up in. And see, it makes it harder for gentrification because, see, then those developers who are buying up this property, they have to come to you and buy a house. They have to pay you for the property. See how you take charge of the neighborhood you grow up in? See how you can just change gentrification simply by taking a little bit of money that you get back from taxes that you wasn't expecting or had to work too hard for, and you can just reinvest it into yourself and prevent developers from coming into your neighborhood, taking and kicking your grandmother out, kicking you out. It's a difference from when you rent in that house, because see, you're renting, it's not yours. That landlord doesn't care you lived in the house 30 years and your grandkids grew up in the house and your great grandkids played on that step right out front. They couldn't leave the step. They don't care about that. Because when that person, that developer comes cut that big check, they're going to adios you out of there so quick. All you're going to see is dust and your furniture laying on the sidewalk. But how can you prevent that and prevent gentrification? How about investing into those neighborhoods, buying those neighborhoods? Then I know what's the next thing people are going to say. Next comment is going to be, well, with all this violence going on in the city, why would I want to buy a house in a neighborhood that's ridden with violence? That people are afraid to walk out in the streets. All right, let me give you an investor tip right here, okay? There's an old saying. When there's blood on the street, buy property. Just think about that for a second, all right? When there's blood on the streets, buy property. What does that mean? See, that's what investors do. That's what the richest economists do in this country, in this world. See, when stocks are at their lowest, that's when they want to buy. Because, see, they know that stocks are not always going to stay down. Eventually, they're going to rise. Anything that hits the ground is going to come back up. And it's the same thing as when you live in these neighborhoods and, yeah, there's crime. There was a drive-by last week, but guess what? Do you think it's always going to be like that? Do you think it's always going to be like that? A lot of times when you see a lot of this stuff, it's to drive down the prices. It's not always going to be like that. Sometimes you just got to wait out that tide. If you can wait out that wave, that crime wave, you can wait it out. You may come off really good. You may buy a home for $30,000 that then turn around and be worth $300 million. Now you probably say, that's impossible. But see, if you know anything about this podcast, you know one thing. We don't deal with saying things impossible. We don't deal with the word unrealistic, because the reality is anything's realistic. It's all about what your mind can create. And what your mind can create, your hands can develop, and you can make things happen. You can turn your thoughts into action, your action to action plans, them action plans into something that actually is physical, that you can touch and that exists. And see, when you're dealing with gentrification, you're dealing with developers and people who are looking at you and they're seeing the value in something that you don't see a value in. So you got to turn around. If you want to make the change, you can't look for somebody to come in your neighbor to help. You can't look for somebody to come in your neighborhood to help. At some point, you got to be willing to stand up and fight back for your neighborhood. And it's not just about telling on the guy across the street or telling on your neighbor. Sometimes it's about simply investing into yourself in your neighborhood, taking that tax money instead of giving it to the sleazy car dealer that lives up the street who's going to sell you this lemon that's not going to last 6 months. Why don't you just buy a house? Then I get some of you may say, you know what? Some people don't want to buy a house because buying a house can be expensive. You don't know what's going to happen to a house. I don't have money to keep up stuff. Well, what if this breaks or what if that breaks? So it makes it a little bit difficult and it's challenging and make you not want to buy a house. And you know what? All I can say to that is you're right. Things happen. Pardon my French, but shit happens. So why would you want to buy a house when you know the possibility that anything can go wrong? And you may not even have the money to be able to get it fixed. You're absolutely right. You got me there. Why would you want to buy a house when you can just have something happen you can't afford to get it, then what? You're back at square one and you lost that $2,000 tax check. And you could have really went and bought some red bombs or that dress or some powerhouse tickets or something like that. You're right. You got me there. You got me. It's a good reason not to buy a house, right? Because, you don't want to buy a house you can't afford to keep it up. I mean, God forbid something happens. That's BS. All right? Straight up, that's BS. Here's the reality of the situation. Things are going to happen in your life regardless of what you do. Where you are, things are going to happen. But one thing about, us that grew up in the inner city, one thing I know about everybody who grew up in the inner city, we are the most creative people on earth. The people at the bottom are the most creative people. So to combat your theory that you shouldn't buy a house because things is going to happen, let's just think about something. We all got that uncle that does plumbing. We all got that cousin that does flooring. We all got that neighbor, that family friend who can do air conditioning. We all know our cousin's best friend who do roofing. So the reality is all them things you need to get done, you can get done. Just like when you buy, once again, that lemon car, you got that mechanic that live in the back alley that can put them brakes on, change the transmission for the low price. Because you're not going to GMC or Mercedes-Benz or wherever you got your car from. You're not going to the dealer to get your car fixed. So you can look at it the same way with your house. You don't always got to call Horizon Services to get your air conditioner fixed when you know Uncle Charlie can do it. So you got to be creative. You can't let these little boundaries restrict you and live your life avoiding of getting anything great for you, to have anything that's yours. See, owning your house is yours. You want to paint all the walls green, paint them green. Nobody can tell you anything. But it's bigger than that. When we think about gentrification and they're changing your neighborhoods, you have the ability to own your house so they can't force you out. They can't force you out the neighborhood once that Domino's pizza that you had to drive 20 miles to get is now on that next corner. Now you can enjoy that. You can enjoy the changes in your neighborhood. You can be a part of that. Not only that, you can control what changes are being made in your neighborhood. You can control it. If you and more people stepped up and decided to buy property in your neighborhood when it's dirt cheap, then you control what and who can come in your neighborhood and make the adjustments. Now listen, I do believe we need to find value in our neighborhood. I do believe we need to see the value in our neighborhood and we need to act on it. We got to act on it. Like seriously, people, we got to act on that. See, sometimes the truth of the matter is we don't always see the value in anything until it's gone. For instance, while we're talking about the subject of gentrification, let me tell you a story. It was this little pizza shop that used to be in an old neighborhood I grew up called Pizza Man. Served awesome pizza, great water ices in the summertime, had little arcade games you put a quarter in. You could sit there and play Ninja Turtles or Street Fighters. Spent hours in there when I was a kid. That's gone now. That's gone. Now they got Subway. There was a corner store, a black-owned corner store called Woody's. Had a little laundromat next to it nobody used. I don't think anybody ever washed their clothes there. I don't know what the point of the laundromat was. It was pretty dirty and Nobody ever watched their clothes. It's not here or there. You also had a corner store right next to it. And for you who don't know what a corner store is, a corner store is basically in urban neighborhoods or a supermarket. Because see, before gentrification, we didn't have a ShopRite or a fresh grocery or any of those big chains or super G's in our neighborhood. So we had to rely on a corner store to get our groceries. And most of the people didn't have cars. So we had to rely on a corner store. So a corner store was a pivotal part of an urban neighborhood. And still is. It's very important to urban neighborhoods. At least it was before gentrification came along, and now you got a ShopRite and all these new supermarkets there. Or now you got where that corner store was is now Family Dollar. Now you got Dollar General. I couldn't fathom the idea of having those things when I was a kid. Not that I don't know if Family Dollar existed. Maybe it did. Dollar General didn't. But I couldn't even fathom the idea of those things. Couldn't fathom the idea of having those things. Such a nice, shiny thing, especially growing up in a neighborhood where everything was so dirty. But is it all the developers' fault because they're trying to make a coin? Is because they're making a change because they're willing to invest in a neighborhood that we just kind of like accepted the way it was and just kind of like dealt with it? No, it's not their fault. It's not their fault. It's not their fault that they are choosing to try to make some money off of us. But it is their fault when they're pushing people out who grew up and lived in those neighborhoods. When they're making it so expensive to live in those neighborhoods that the people who grew up in grandchildren and raised their children, and their grandchildren raised their children there, are forced out of those neighborhoods. It is bad when public schools in those neighborhoods start to get forgotten. And they start to get more ran down. And they start to get shut down, forcing children out of their neighborhood. Forcing teachers out of a neighborhood that work in those neighborhoods that know those students, that can truly reach and talk to them students, that can help them. You see, it's when things start to have a trickle-down effect and the people at the bottom are truly affected. And see, that's the thing that gets missed in gentrification. See, when people think about gentrification, they think about convenience. Because that's what the reality of gentrification is. You got these big banks that work in these cities. You got these CEOs who don't want to travel 20 or 30 miles to work, so why not put an expensive condo in the middle of the city right next to their business so it makes them easier to work there. And of course you need very nice restaurants, you need very nice stores, you gotta have a supermarket, and don't forget Domino's Pizza, because you got to have Domino's Pizza. So you gotta have that there, so you kind of forget about the people who lived in that neighborhood. You're really just focused on conveniencing the people who never even visit this neighborhood, that just comes here and work, that has no appreciation, no value, or no understanding of the history of these neighborhoods that are constantly changing. See, history is not always about what happened in the Civil War or what happened during war times. See, history is made up by people who live in those neighborhoods, who make up the history in those neighborhoods. See, I'm a part of a history in the neighborhood I grew up in. Not because we did bad things, because of the fun things we did. Because of the fun memories, because of the corner store named Woody's that had the rundown laundromat. See, it's a piece of my history. It's a story for me. Because of the corner stores that served us, where we buy the quarter water juices, or the Star Crunch bars, or the fudge rounds. See, those stores, that was our history right there. Or the old creepy guy that lived on the other corner that just stared out his doorway all day, just watching the kids as we run up and down the street. See, that's what makes the history. Those are stories I always love to tell my children about. And see, when I take my children through my old neighborhood, take them to see my old house, see where I got into my first fist fight, where I first learned how to play sports, where I played tackle football on the field. It's just crazy when I don't even notice that neighborhood anymore. And it changes my opinion on gentrification when I see people who grew up in that neighborhood are now being forced out of the neighborhood, not because they did something wrong or they committed a crime or they broke a rule, not because they didn't take care of their home, but simply because they just can't afford to live in the neighborhood anymore because developers and people came in and made it so expensive that they forced them out. It makes me even more sad that we as people can't see the value enough in our neighborhood, that we can't take that tax money, that extra cash we got, and invest it in buying a house in our neighborhood and saying we own a piece of that history that we once created. Now, I know if you grew up in like the projects, you know, that's not an option to really buy property there. And if you're like me, growing up in the projects, it's really not an option for me to buy a piece of property in the projects. If I could, honestly, I would. Honestly, I would, for the simple fact, it meant so much to me. I am who I am today. I know what I know because of what I went through, what I did, what I experienced. And a lot of times you hear on the news and you hear through people all the negativity that come out of the inner city, out of urban neighborhoods, all the violence, all the killings. And you forget to see the people who made it out, whose lives was forever changed by those same neighborhoods. Not always in the worst possible way, but in good ways. For a person like me, whose father had a drug problem and was not able to be there for me in the majority of my life at the most important part of my life, it was those neighborhoods that didn't teach me just bad things, but taught me how to play sports, taught me how to play basketball, influenced my love of basketball, influenced my love of hip hop. It was those neighborhoods and them people who lived in that neighborhood that kept me straight, that kept me from going down a bad road, kept me out of jail. It was those experiences in the neighborhood that gave me character, taught me respect. And I know a lot of people step back and say, well, they don't see that in those neighborhoods, and that's being lost in those neighborhoods. And you're right, it is being lost. You're right. You don't see as many parents teach their kids like I was taught, and some of you were taught about respect and stuff. You're right. You don't see as many people that see the value in those neighborhoods. I get it. You're right. I can't argue against that. But the fact of the matter is, when you think about gentrification and all the changes that happen in gentrification, it really kind of just hurts my heart. Because I know so many people when I lived in the neighborhoods that still lived there when I left. And I used to think, that woman's never going to leave. Me and my sister used to say, she's never going to leave. And the old woman across the street, her grandkids is going to live in that same house. When they get older, they're never going to leave. They were planted to that home. And when you look at it and you go back and you realize they were forced out. They were forced out because of convenience and a person of higher stature, higher class, needed a place that was more convenient, an easier route to work. So they forced out the people who lived in them homes to convenience somebody else who don't understand the history of that home. And that home was not just a house, not just a building. It was a box full of memories, good and bad. That's what you forget when you think about gentrification. You forget about the children who are truly affected, not because you're cleaning up the neighborhood, because reality is, when you think about violent stuff, you're not really cleaning up the neighborhood. And people that, developers and all these lawmakers who are okay in gentrification are really not cleaning up the neighborhood, because that was the reality, that they was cleaning up the neighborhood. We wouldn't be dealing with so much violence as we do. When the reality is, what they do is they put you on a box cart or a box truck and they just move you somewhere else. And they let the violence continue. But as long as it's not inconveniencing the people who make the big bucks and make the dollars and make the world go around, we don't care about you killing each other. We don't worry about addressing the problem. We'll let the news keep reporting it, and we'll just keep living our lives and not doing much to change it. So if you're thinking gentrification is really cleaning up these neighborhoods and making it safer and making it a better place to live, the reality is it's not. The reality is it's not. You can tell yourself whatever lie you need to and to believe. And I understand some of you that's listening, you may not understand a word I'm saying or this might not even relate to you. You might not get it. Maybe you never really lived in these neighborhoods and you don't understand the importance of it. Maybe gentrification is not your problem because you live in the suburbs, and the reality is you may not have to ever worry about it. I get it. Maybe some of you are saying, well, I'm Caucasian, so it doesn't affect me. Or I'm Asian, and see, it doesn't affect me because, Chinatown doesn't deal with gentrification, or Little Italy doesn't deal with gentrification, but the reality is it even affects you. See, you're Asian and you own a Chinese store, it affects you because, see, now you got Panda Express, new Chinese stores. You got all these new Chinese food brands that's coming out. They're marketing and marginalizing it as more of a chain. The Chinese stores are now becoming chains. You used to have local pizzerias for the Italian people, but reality is we don't have them no more. Now we got Little Caesars now, $5 pizzas, and a horrible pizza, but you know what? $5 pizza is a lot cheaper, and for people who are already financially strapped, they don't really have the money to pay $12, $13 for a large pepperoni pizza when I can just get 2 of them for $10. And you're not thinking about the quality of the pizza. When I talk about pizza, man, the old store I used to go to, we're not talking about the quality of that pizza. Was just so much better than Little Caesars pizza. It doesn't matter because you know what the difference is. Pizza Man pizza was about $12 for a large pepperoni. When I go to Little Caesars, I can get 2 large pepperonis for $10 and still have $2 in my pocket left. And the reality is, and most of us don't really think about the quality of the product we get. So when we talk about, maybe you're Italian, Little Italy is not changing, or maybe you're Asian or Chinese and you're not being affected by gentrification. The reality is gentrification is extending more than just the urban neighborhoods. It's affecting more than just black people. It's affecting more than just black schools. It's affecting you too, because see, like I said, Panda Express is going to eventually get bigger and bigger, and that change will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And guess what? Your little local Chinese stores are going to further get pushed out. Some family-owned Chinese stores are going to further get pushed out, and we're going to be all eating at Panda Express or Sukihana or whatever other Chinese chain that might come. See, Little Anthony's Pizzeria might be pushed out, and Little Caesars is going to take that. And okay, Little Caesars pizza might not be as good, but it's cheaper, so why not? And that chain starts to take over. And you see how it's an effect on all of us? See, often we think about how things don't affect us all. When we talk about discussion of racism, we think about who's affected by racism, and if it doesn't affect me, then it doesn't bother me. When we talk about police brutality, a lot of times we say, you know what? The issue between the community and the police doesn't affect me, it doesn't bother me, so I can ignore it, I can keep it pushing, I'm not worried about it. But in situations we rarely see how all these things connect and how they all affect us one way or other. Even if it's not directly, it can affect us through our family, our friends, people that we love. And if you think about gentrification, think about this. It may not affect you directly, but like everything we talk about in this podcast, everything we mention, we discuss, in some way, this too affects somebody you love, or you care about, whether it's a family member or a friend. It too affects them because, Little Anthony's might be owned by your cousin. And because Little Caesars just moved across the street from Little Anthony's now, he's shutting down. Your cousin now, in fact. That Chinese store that you love, Panda Express, just moved right next door. Now it's gone. Your cousin's Chinese store is gone. See, it goes beyond that, people. See, a lot of times we get so caught up with racism and stuff. And yes, racism is a serious problem in this country, in this world, and it still exists regardless of what people tell you. But the reality of the situation is, I'm going to sign off by saying this. We also have an issue with class. And what I mean by class is, unlike racism, class, we're all in the same boat. See, poor white people, poor Asian people, poor Latino people are all placed in the same box when it comes to class. See, if you're poor and you're Caucasian, you're poor and you're Latino, you're poor and you're Asian, you're poor and you're black, guess what? You're still looked at upon the same exact way. And at some point you're going to be affected by gentrification because the reality is, despite the color of your skin, your gender, your race, spirituality beliefs, if you can't afford to live in those neighborhoods, then you got to get the hell out. And you will be kicked the hell out. So the reality is, until we all stand together and make adjustments and changes in this world, we all going to continue to be victims to all the continuous changes that's happening in this world, and gentrification is one of them. I want to thank y'all for listening to another episode of Ordinary People Podcast, where we talk to ordinary people with extraordinary stories, or where it's about informing, motivating, inspiring you. I want to come back again next, as we're going to speak about something a lot more serious than gentrification. We're going to speak about mental health and how it's affecting all people in certain races. So please come back to check out the next episode where we're going to talk about mental health. And as always, we appreciate your time and for you listening. I'm Alan the Great, and I'm saying peace. We want to thank you again for listening to another episode of the Ordinary People Podcast, where it's not about likes and views, it's about inspiring, motivating, and informing you. As always, we encourage you to please like, share, and comment on the video. If you have a difference of opinion, comment below or email me directly, ordinarypeoplepodcast 16 at gmail.com. Once again, ordinarypeoplepodcast 16 at gmail.com. Also, if you want to book me for a special speaking appearance, whether it's a motivational experience or you want to hear my opinion on other things, please, once again, hit me up, ordinarypeoplepodcast 16 at gmail.com. We want to thank you for listening and thank you for subscribing. Peace.